You just need to be very adaptable. And the stronger you are at emotional intelligence, which, I know not everybody's familiar with emotional intelligence, but like the stronger you are at knowing yourself and at recognizing other people's, skill sets, the easier it's going to be for you to navigate this, to adapt, to have these different conversations. So like really knowing yourself, and that's why I say finding your voice is like what I help people do, is like you got to really know yourself well enough that you can then use your voice to have conversations with your boss, ask these difficult questions, ask for feedback, maybe delegate or train a new person, right? It's all in just really knowing what's going to work for you and, implementing that.
Hello and welcome to the Stroke It podcast. I'm Jenny Townsend, your host. Thank you for joining me. I'm so excited for you to be inspired to live your life fully, to take ownership of your time, your schedule, and your life, but most importantly, learn and grow and develop personally and professionally. Myself and others are going to share life lessons that we've learned through leadership, through heartache, through pain, through struggles, and we'll be sharing some success stories with you as well. Super eager for you to dive in, learn, and grow. And once again, just take ownership of your life today. Welcome to the Stroke It podcast. I'm Jenny Townsend, your host. Today, I have Jovita with me. She is a career development coach. She is going to be talking about how to stroke your employer, your employee, and yourself. This podcast is going to cater to your professional and personal life. I'm very excited for her to share all her tips and tricks and tools to better your life. Jovita, thank you for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny, for having me.
Well, I would love for you to share with our guest who you are, what's the experience that you have, and kind of just give us a little bit of insight of what we can expect from you today.
Absolutely. So, my name is Jovita, as you said. I actually am a career coach. I focus on career development. And really what I do is I help people build better lives through their career. I just mentioned to you, like, I believe your career is just a tool to build the life that you want. And I have incorporated that in my coaching business. I also am currently the vice president of operations for Covington Ridge Financial. I've been in that position now for about 6 years. So even the people that I manage, and I've been managing people for about 9 years now, going on 9 years this year. So all the people that I manage and then into my coaching practice, it's all about helping people really find their voice and use it to gain confidence and speak with clarity about their skills and really develop that consistency as well. A couple other groups I affiliated with: Toastmasters International, if you've ever heard of that. I've been in Toastmasters for probably about 10 years now. And then I also help Live and Learn, which is a local organization in Phoenix that help women get out of generational poverty through career development as well.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And I have not been part of Toastmasters, but I've heard great things about it. And do you think that is something that someone in their early 20s or 30s or starting their career should sign up for?
Absolutely. As I said, I've been in 10 years. So when I first started, I was in my about mid to late 20s, and it helped me so much in my career because you don't often get an area or place to practice working on your communication skills where there's not as much impact. And what I mean by that is like you might say something or do something at home in your relationships or at work in your relationships, and then it comes back to haunt you or you regret what you said. But in Toastmasters, you have a safe place where you can practice, you can get experience understanding people's different communication styles. And it's just like if you make a mistake, it doesn't do anything, right? Like you're going to get the feedback and move on. So,
Right. You're not going to get fired or get demoted.
yeah, yeah, yes, exactly. So it's kind of nice to have like a completely outside place for you to work on those skills.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. So if those that are out there that want to learn and check out Toastmasters. Okay, what phase or stage of your life are you currently in right now?
This is such a great question. I definitely believe in setting intentions and resolutions every year. So my word for this year is stabilize. And I chose that word because, last year I had a lot of challenges with family, with career, with different things. And one thing that I want everybody to understand is like you can't be constantly growing. You can't be constantly trying to improve. You have to stabilize. So you kind of have to reset your foundation of, actually executing and applying the things you learned and just really getting yourself together. So this year, I had a lot of challenges I faced. I grew a lot, I learned a lot. And so this year I just want to kind of stabilize that in my professional career, in my coaching, and in my personal life.
I love that. So I think that I need to learn that from you is to stabilize. I'm always wanting to push the envelope and how much more can I do and where can I go this year? And I encourage all of my team members as well to constantly be growing. And there is a time for reflection as well. But at the same time, I like that idea of just slowing down and just stabilizing what you have and becoming very good at it and very clear on where you're going as well. I pick a word every year as well. And I have my leadership team members. And just this past year, actually, for our company at our annual retreat, our company picked a word for the year. So every single person within our company contributed to the list and we picked quality. And then we took a focus wheel and then we talked about how incorporating quality in all aspects of our life is going to change the overall company and ourselves as well. So picking a word is very, very powerful. So for those that don't know about that, look up that.
I love that you've like shared that habit with your entire team because it is a habit and it is like such a help to have that focus and like always go back to that focus. Because, like you said, we're running around, we're doing so many things. It's so easy to just put your head down and grind out, and you look up and you're like, what am I doing? So, having that word quality, I think, will be great for your team.
Yeah, and it's going to be a great guide for us. So it's interesting because all the things are like, well, that's not quality. Of course, we had to upgrade every chair in our organization, had to have the place repainted, things like that. So, anyways, okay, well, awesome. Well, part of I feel like stroking it in communication and working with people is all about understanding love languages. And I know the love languages apply to everyone's personal life, and there's a book out there, the love languages for the workplace as well. But tell us what your experience is and how you think that the love languages are incorporated in the business world.
Absolutely. I definitely first heard of love languages for my personal life. My two love languages are acts of service and quality time. But when I think about how it translates into the workplace, it's the same concept in terms of everybody has a different communication style. Everybody receives information in different ways. And so, in order to build really good rapport and trust and credibility with people, you have to kind of cater to the communication style as especially for people who are leaders, managers. You need to learn how to show appreciation to your employees based on how they receive information. So the same way that you might recognize or reward one employee is going to be different than a different employee. So it's really important to understand people's different communication styles.
100%. I had two managers working for our organization, and one I could say, here's $20. And one would say, I want to go out to eat with you and let's go to breakfast. And the other one would be like, I'll take the $20 and run. So they're completely different. So I think that you're spot on with what you just said there. So, all right. So let's get right into the topics that you decided. And we're going to be talking about employer, employee, and yourself. And since you do manage people and I own a company and I manage people too, let's talk about employer first and what your thought process is in that and what the focus would be if we want to grow.
Absolutely. So the main thing, if you guys go to my website, growwithjovita.com, you're going to see all over, or if you go to my social media at growwithjovita, I talk about having effective development conversations with your boss. This is like the number one thing. So if you're the boss or if you're the employee, most of the time I work with employees who are trying to build rapport with their boss, but also for the leaders that I help coach, I have an effective development conversation template. It has 6 steps to what makes an effective development conversation. The reason that it's so important to do this is because you get into so like as an employee, you're just joining a company. Regardless of how much experience you have before you joined this company, you're new to this company. And when you got hired, you likely only met about 60-70% of the qualifications, which is 100% fine. Like you don't need to be 100% of the qualifications, but you do need to understand how to grow within your role that you have. That includes having clear expectations, being able to set boundaries, being able to talk to your boss about the things that you need need, to motivate you to be recognized, the things that you need when you need help. So having those effective development conversation is going to be a difference between you being successful in your position, feeling, unhappy in your position, feeling like you can't speak up for yourself. So that's why I teach that as like a number one component. As a leader, you use the conversation, the template the same way, but basically in reverse, right? So you want to make sure that you're always being available to your employees in the same way, that you are giving them the space to open up, to ask you questions, to have those feedback conversations. And as the boss, it's our responsibility to give the employees a sense of safety and trust so that they can have those conversations.
And those conversations can be tough as well, depending on how long you've been with the company, how well you know your boss, and depending on the track record as well, or where the company is going to. So, all those 6 steps, are there like 6 separate steps for the employer and the employee, or it's the same? You just work them backwards.
Yeah, it's just 6 steps of what makes the conversation successful. So, real quick, I'll run through the 6. So, the first one is having an objective for every conversation. You can't know if the conversation is successful if you don't have a clear objective. And the objective can be small. It can just be, hey, I need to build better rapport with this person. It could be, hey, I need to ask clarifying questions about expectations. Hey, we need to talk about performance, right? Like whatever the objective is, that needs to be the focus. It's not effective when conversations are all over the place, right? When you're talking about 3, 4 different things, that's not effective. So you stick to one objective.
May I ask you a May I ask you a question about that? Yeah, no, that's fine. So when it comes to the objective, is that something that we should email our boss like ahead of time so they have an idea of what we want to talk about? Or do we just schedule the meeting and we just bring up the objective right then and there?
So you definitely want to give them a heads up, right? And that's just like as a courtesy so that everybody feels like they know what's happening coming into this conversation. So whether you're the boss or whether you're the employee, you're simply just going to be like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about XYZ. Do you have time next week for us to get together? So number 2 is I like to get all the follow-up items out of the way first. That way there's nothing lingering in the back of your mind throughout the conversation. So if there's anything pending from your last conversation or that needs to get addressed, knock that out, get it out the way first so that everybody can be open and focused on the new topics that are going to be discussed.
That's a great point right then and there.
So 3, we'd like to talk about your skills. So this is where we're going to talk about your strengths. And it doesn't have to be so specific of like, oh my gosh, I need to list everything that's awesome about you, but you definitely want to, for both as the employee or the employer, to talk about things that are strengths. As the employee, this is going to help you get practice in how to articulate your strengths because we tend to not know how to speak up about our own skills, or like we feel like we're bragging too much or something like that. But you really do need to get comfortable talking about the things that you're doing well. And as a boss, again, you want to make sure you're giving feedback to your employees about the things they're doing well.
Yeah, I think being specific as well. If you're going to acknowledge someone and you're going to say, hey, great job, be specific of what they're doing. So that way they're more encouraged to keep doing that because they may think you're talking about something completely different. And you're like, no, that's not really what I want you to and keep working on. So that's a great point. Now, I know that can be, especially for people that are just starting out their career, where they haven't built the confidence yet to really talk about their strengths and what they bring to the table. Do you have any tips on how to navigate that if you're not confident enough to say, I'm really great at all these things?
Absolutely. So this actually kind of goes a little bit back to what you're talking about with the love languages, right? So if you're the boss, again, like you want to be very specific in what you're saying so that you can appreciate them in the way they want to be appreciated. But as an employee, if I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not that confident speaking up, an exercise that I do with people is called a SWOT analysis. The simple version is like, I have you list out your strengths, 10 strengths. And I can tell you, most people struggle to list 10. I will be honest, like they can get 4 or 5, but then they really have to dig a little bit deeper to push themselves to find the 10. And so by having those strengths listed out and kind of always at the forefront, it's just like, cool. Now, I need you to find a way to talk about these things when you're having a conversation. Pick 1 or 2 of these things that you can bring up in your conversation.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, awesome. Okay, so what's your 4th tip?
Then we have to talk about areas of opportunity. So we have to be honest with ourselves that we might have some weaknesses or some things that might be holding us back. So we're not going to hide away from talking about that, right? Like you said, we have to be confident in doing that. So as the employer, you want to give honest, direct, and actionable feedback to your employees. But as an employee, it's your responsibility to also ask for feedback if you're not getting it. So it's it's something where you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to listen, and just really ask, like, hey, like, what could I be doing better? And again, being specific, like you said.
Yeah, I think that that's hard for some people to, because number one, some people are just cool with content with just being who they are and not really growing or growing within the organization and things like that. And I do know that people are scared of what your boss or someone, your employer may say, and don't know how to react to it either. So I know that that can be challenging for people to ask for feedback. So do you have any tips on way to phrase that? Is that an email? Is that scheduling a meeting for it? Like, how do we get people to ask for feedback so that they can take it?
Absolutely. So, in this development conversation, this is just a one on one conversation with your boss. So, ideally, you have enough rapport with your boss where you feel comfortable. But if you're just getting started, I would say you don't have to go full blown, let's get all the feedback, right? It's a practice like anything else. So, if you're not comfortable asking for feedback right up front, then you want to start small. So, ask about something specific on a task that you just completed. Like, hey, I know that you asked me to do this report for you, and I turned it in. Is there anything that I could have done differently that you would have liked? Right. And just start with something small like that. It doesn't have to be, tell me everything I'm doing wrong. Like that. That is a little bit overwhelming, especially like you said, if you're not in a position where you're like, hey, I'm ready to advance and I don't need all this feedback, but you still want to start practicing having that feedback relationship with your boss.
Well, I think it probably builds a sense of trust where they can have a really open conversation as they navigate through the future and depending on the years that they're going to be together. And then you're kind of learning when you are in a manager position how you're going to be having those conversations with the employees in the future too if you end up in a management role. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so what's number 5 I think we're on?
So then we talk about action items. So I'm always a big component of, like, if I'm leaving a meeting, a develop meeting, we have to have some action items for the employee as well as for myself. It is not your boss's responsibility to be in charge of your career advancement and your development. You have to take ownership as well. So the idea of action items, again, don't have to be big things. Maybe it's just, hey, I want you to, if we use the same example of the report, well, then implement that feedback and use it on the next report so that when we talk again, now I can see how you implemented the feedback and how well you did. If it's something where, for example, a lot of people have difficulty knowing how they want to advance. Like, they want to talk to their boss about development, but they're like, but I don't even know what to develop on, or like what to ask them about it. I don't want to look silly because I'm going and saying I want development, but I don't know what I want it on. So one action item I like to give people when they come to me with that is like, okay, why don't you go talk to this person in this department and see what they think about their position, and just get some ideas if you think that might be something you would be interested in. So maybe an action item is just setting up conversations to talk to other people to learn about other roles and responsibilities.
I think that's a great point. I always want to encourage my people to always create a manual for their role too. So that way they are able to like look at the future and know that a lot of stuff that they're doing right now, they may not be doing in the future, but to track it so that they're already thinking about the next move or the next level that they're going to go up within the company. And I know some people are like, oh, wait, that's job security, or they just aren't thinking that they're going to take the next management role and they're going to potentially be replacing their position with somebody else and then training them. So, do you have any insight on that as far as like training your future replacement so that you really can start thinking about the future move?
Absolutely. So this is something I struggled with early in my career, because I exactly what you just said is how I thought of, like, I need to be so awesome at my role, and I need to do all these things, and just kind of hold on to everything myself, because I'm like, no, this is my role and I want to be, the go-to person for this thing. But what happens is when I was ready to move up, it was like it wasn't that they were holding me back from moving up. I was kind of holding myself back because they're like, well, we don't have anybody to backfill your position. Like you have made this position where you're the only one who can do this now, and we won't be able to let you advance until we figure out how to handle this. Right. So once I saw that happen in my career a couple times where I was kind of pigeonholed in these roles, and my own fault, because I kind of did that because I thought that was helping me, like you said, kind of have job security. But once I realized it was stalling me being able to advance further, I was like, okay, there is a balance between having SOPs, like you said, having, training documents ready, but really also making sure that the process is open to other people's skill sets. This is not something I expect an employee to do by themselves without the help of their boss. But one of the things that I teach people when they're delegating is you have to let people do things the way they do them. It's not going to look the way you might have done it. And again, if you think about the communication styles and like the love language flipping, it's the same kind of concept of, if you're going to ask somebody else to step in and do something, you need to communicate that in a completely different way than how you would do it, right? Like, so the way that I do something is not the same way if I have an employee and I'm like, hey, employee, I need you to do something. It's a completely different situation. So, yeah. A lot of adaptability when you're thinking about career and communication. I think the idea of applying this concept is like, you just need to be very adaptable, and the stronger you are at emotional intelligence, which, I know not everybody's familiar with emotional intelligence, but like the stronger you are at knowing yourself and at recognizing other people's, skill sets, the easier it's going to be for you to navigate this, to adapt, to have these different conversations. So, like, really knowing yourself, and that's why I say finding your voice is like what I help people do, is like, you got to really know yourself well enough that you can then use your voice to have conversations with your boss, ask these difficult questions, ask for feedback, maybe delegate or train a new person, right? It's all in just really knowing what's going to work for you and, implementing that.
Right. I think just having a clear direction too. So, like, I know we're going to get to the next point, but when you are talking with your clients and you're working with people, when they start a new job, are you exposing them to think long term with this company, or is it more short term? Like, because I feel like, doesn't that help navigate, like, if they're going to be wanting to move up within that company? Or like, is there any insight of like, when you start the job, is it just a stepping stone, or do you want to become a lifer? Like, are you having those conversations?
Yeah, so I have a 30, 60, 90-day, what I call an onboarding plan. So this is, again, as a manager, I use this for my people, and as a coach, I teach this to other people who are starting a job. So the idea is, in your first 30 days, you're just trying to absorb what is happening. So like, no, the first 30 days, you're not thinking ahead to like what's going to happen, other than you're just trying to like, was this the right move? Did I come to the right place? Are my skill sets a match for the values and the vision of this position? That kind of thing, right? Your next 60 days is now you want to be able to articulate your voice, right? Because your first 30 days, you're more like listening. You're more like listening, building rapport. Your second 30 days, so 60 days, you're trying to build your brand. You're trying to articulate your value. You want them to see you a certain way. And how do you get that? By using your voice, right? And then in the 90 days, depending on the position, because some positions take longer to train on, right? But then in the 90 days, that's when you want to start thinking about, maybe you're not going to get promoted, in the next 90 days, but you want to start thinking about, what type of things am I going to do to grow in my position? And how can I leverage that to get me my next position? So you do always want to, well, I should, so let me just make one statement that I always make to people. When you have when you have the ability to do this, it's amazing. I do recognize that some people don't have the ability to focus so much on their development because maybe they have, debt or family or other things that they're like, I just need to survive. I'm just living paycheck to paycheck, and I just need to pay, and I just need to make money, and I can't concentrate on all of these development things and relationships. And I totally get that. And I'm not trying to tell people that they should not focus on that. If you need to get your household right and your money right, then definitely do that. But when we are fortunate enough to have the ability to choose, you want to think about, okay, what choice am I making today that is good for me today, but also good for me in the future?
Right. And I think just forward thinking, and I think most managers or business owners, CEOs, that's what they were thinking from day one. What is not necessarily the exit strategy, but what's the next step? Let me get in the door, let me learn, let me absorb, and then put all cylinders on to go to that next level too, and increase their income or their lifestyle and things like that as well. And I know that not everybody's there. We need the workers. We can't all be visionaries. We can't all be ones that want to take the risk as well. So there is a happy medium between what you need on your team. Okay, awesome. Okay, so what's number 6?
So the final one is the most important one, I feel like, maybe the second most because the objective is most important, but is scheduling another meeting, like having an actual like plan in mind to meet again, because you're not going to solve all of this in one 30-minute, 45-minute conversation. And so if you don't take the initiative to say, hey, I want to follow up with you in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, in a month on these action items, on these topics that we talked about, then you're really kind of leaving again your development, your growth into somebody else's hands. So you want to make a commitment to setting the next meeting date.
Yeah, I think that's super, super important. It's also a way to keep yourself accountable and moving forward and developing a plan. Now, when you schedule this meeting with your boss or your employer, when you're thinking about time, are you setting 30 minutes or 45 minutes? Like, how are you determining how much time to ask your boss that you need to go through these 6 items?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's going to depend on the frequency of your meetings. If you're meeting pretty frequently, you shouldn't need to spend more than 30 minutes to get through this entire 6 step conversation, because you're honestly like, what are you going to talk about, right? Like if you're meeting weekly or bi-weekly, I meet with my employees bi-weekly, and that is enough time for us to get through all of these topics in 30 minutes. Now, if it is something more specific, like let's say I have a person who's like on the verge of a promotion and where we are working very specifically on certain things, then I would spend maybe 45 minutes or an hour with them, just because we have so much to cover very specifically. Or if you have um, um, like a major project, that requires a little bit more digging into. But honestly, 30-45 minutes should be good. And you want to be mindful of other people's time. Like if you ask for a longer than an hour meeting, I think you just have to be, you might expect that they will not be able to complete that, right? So it kind of decreases your chance of getting time with them if you're asking for a lot of time on their schedule. So again, when you choose that objective, if you think your objective can't be covered in 30-45 minutes, you might need to rethink what your objective is for the meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Now, do you have any tips on if you should pick like the beginning of the week or end of the week when you're scheduling these meetings with your boss to talk about these objectives?
That one is going to be one you're going to have to base it off of what the workflow is at your job. So, like for me, I would never schedule meetings on a Monday. Mondays are crazy for us, you know. I also, for me personally, afternoon is better than the morning, but that's at the current job I'm at now. Whereas in a different position, it might be better to do it first thing in the morning to knock it out the way. It might be better to do it earlier in the week. So, you really are going to need to think about, what other meetings are on your schedule, what tasks need to be completed. Don't do it when you're in the middle of a deadline, right? Like, so timing is very important. You do want to be, thinking about that and mindful of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Mondays are not a great day, or if your leadership team or your managers already have meetings on a Tuesday, don't schedule on a Tuesday because they're probably going to be working on whatever they just discussed on that in that meeting as well. So I think also knowing what is also on your boss's plate and what all they're tackling and projects and deadlines they're dealing with is important to consider as well. That because you want them to be in the right mindset and mind frame and have brain power to actually have a good conversation with you. I've been running into this with one of my employees who is working on a project for me. And I'm thinking 30, 60, 90 days we're going to be meeting, and they want to meet with me more frequently than that. And just the other day, it was like, I couldn't respond to the email. I just don't have the time in my schedule right now and the brain power to actually sit down and have this conversation with this person. So I keep putting them off and I keep putting them off, which is a terrible thing to do. I need to just sit down, But the way that they operate and the way that I operate are so different. So I'm more of a visionary, big picture, just give me A, B, and C and let's make a decision, where this person's very detail oriented. So do you have any advice for people that may be like me on how to bridge the gap with these conversations when our mindsets are completely different and how we receive the messages?
Yes. So I have a couple recommendations. I love what you're saying to me because it is a very common situation where you have two different communication styles between you and your employee, and then you're trying to figure out a schedule. So my first recommendation for the schedule is set up reoccurring meetings on your calendar. So for certain employees that I know that I need to talk to regularly, either because that's what they need, from me, or that's what I need, I just have it, I pick the date that works best for both of us, and it's on the calendar all the time. Now, we might skip a meeting, but it's on there anyway. So I don't go in with the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to skip this meeting. It's already built into my schedule. So you kind of have, now your mindset is around that as opposed to trying to squeeze this in. It's like, no, everything else has to work around that. So I would recommend doing that. But what the thing it sounds like that you and your employee need, and for anybody else who has this struggle of like, we don't have the same idea of what these meetings are supposed to be like, that needs to be objective one of your meeting. So your very first meeting with this person, don't talk about the project, don't talk about all the details. Your objective should be, we need to have clear expectations. Your expectations of what you want and need and what they want and need are not the same. You can't cater all the way to them. They can't cater all the way to you. You guys have to come up with the understanding of like, this is how I need to be communicated. This is how often we want to communicate with each other. These are the type of things we need to communicate, and just have that conversation for 30 minutes. That way, when you do have your future meetings, you're like, cool, we already are on point with what we're talking about. I know how to prepare for this. They know how to prepare for it, and it'll help make it smoother going forward.
Yeah, I think that's you're spot on as well. I did a training when I was with a national corporation several years ago, and it was all about communication, and we all had to pick a shape. And then every shape had different ways of communicating and receiving. And I was obviously the shape. Just tell me big picture and what I need to know. I don't need to know the details. So I just need to tell this person that so that they just give me the high level. That's what I want. So even though my word for the year is details. So I'm going to be focusing more on the details this year. So, um,
So I will say, like, one thing that I tell a lot of people too is like, when your boss is the owner, which is what your situation is, and like I work directly for the owner of my company. Like when your boss is the owner, of course you're going to have to cater your style very differently. It doesn't mean that they can't get that other communication out with other peers or with other stakeholders that are involved in the project. But when it comes to talking to you, they do want to, like I said, you guys need to adjust. They have to adjust to you, you have to adjust to them, but you do have to make that adjustment. And then if they need to have a more detailed, in-depth conversation, they can pull somebody else from the project to do that.
Right. That's a great point. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, I think we talked a lot about employer and employee, and that's all really great information. And obviously, in order to be a great employer or employee, you've got to take care of yourself. So let's talk about yourself and self awareness and development and how that builds habits and things like that.
People have not heard of emotional intelligence. I actually hadn't heard of it either long ago. But once I realized, it has been a game changer for me. It's been a game changer in the sense of like the feeling that I have about myself, my confidence, my work, how people see me is completely changed. So for anybody who hasn't heard of it, an easy, quick intro to it is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a easy book for you to understand the concepts. But the main concept you want to get started with is self-awareness. So what I teach my clients is about managing your negative emotions at work, because let's face it, like we all have stressors, right? We all have difficult conversations, we all have anxiety and stuff that comes from work. So what I like to teach is identifying your emotional triggers and using that to help you communicate. So just a quick example of what I mean. Let's say that you're like, okay, I have to go to this meeting with my boss and I'm feeling very anxious about it, or I'm feeling really stressed about it. So what I tell people is like, take a step back and I want you to ask yourself why 3 times. Why are you feeling anxious? And then dig into that really deep. So maybe I'm feeling anxious because it's the first time I've had a conversation with my boss. Okay, well, why does that make you anxious? It makes me anxious because I don't want to look silly because I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so then why does that make you Like, why do you feel like you're going to look silly? Because my boss in the past has, maybe been short with me or curt with me, and it made me feel like I have to be careful of what I say, right? So, like, you kind of have to dig into what the real emotion is that you're feeling so that you can kind of address it and then communicate and respond more effectively. So again, real quick, because I know we don't have a ton of time, the SWOT analysis that I do with my clients of like identifying the strengths is going to help with that, because again, we have to take an inward look at ourselves, and we do want to think about the things we do well. It can't always be about the things that we don't do well, or the stress or the anxiety or negative feelings, or feeling bad that we even have negative feelings, right? Like, we can't be so down on ourselves. So really just doing exercises of positivity, positive self-talk, positive self-awareness exercises. Journaling is a big one for me. I journal all the time. It's what has helped me kind of get through some of that difficulty in my personal life and professional life.
You know, I just love everything that you're saying. I feel like I need to just fly you to Sarasota, Florida, and you should come work with my team and I just think that you're so right. And, this whole concept of the whole stroke it thing came about because of negativity and self-worth. And I had to do a lot of positives chatter, and I started journaling, started doing all these things to make me a better person so that I could be a better employer. And so much of it begins with you or me or I. And at what point was that like a breaking point for you, or did you realize that, or have you noticed that with the clients that you work with that really understand how important they are to the whole agenda or to the whole of the organization?
So my like breaking point for me, because this was a blind spot for me. Like I said, I never even heard of emotional intelligence, but I had felt so frustrated at my job and like unappreciated. This would have been like 10, 12 years ago. Where I'm like, I'm doing everything right. I'm working hard. I'm talented. I get stuff done. I don't understand why I'm still so frustrated at work, or why I'm unhappy at work, or why, all these negative feelings. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling burned out. And so I did a 360 feedback survey. Somebody told me, like, do this 360 feedback survey, because obviously I can't figure out what's wrong. So I need somebody to help me figure out what's wrong. The 360 feedback is just an anonymous survey from all the different stakeholders, customers, bosses, everybody you work with. And somebody told me in my feedback, I'm not making this up, they were like, we like working with Jovita because she gets stuff done, but I don't like working with her because the way that she talks to me makes me feel stupid. Like that is legit what they said. Like, the way that I was carrying myself, the way that I was communicating, the way that I was not handling my negative emotions, like, they felt like I was difficult to work with. So once I was like, oh my gosh, all these things that I thought were making me more talented and making me more skilled and making people think I was awesome is actually hurting me, like, it's actually doing the opposite of that. And in the sense of the type of position I wanted to get in. Now, there's definitely people who, if you're just an individual contributor and you're like, I come in and I do my job and I leave, then that's fine. But for me, that's not what I wanted. Like, I wanted to advance further in my career. And so knowing that is why I shifted to be like, your relationships at work are like the most powerful thing that you have, because you have to have people who want to work with you. You have to have customers who want to buy from you. You have to have bosses who want to give you more opportunities, right? Like, you need advocates, so like, once I realized that, I was like, cool, well, I need to learn how to adjust my communication style to other people's style. I need to learn my own self-awareness so I can manage my emotions and not be so reactive, and not, so I can be more composed and like keep myself together when stress. I'm going to still have stress. I'm still going to be overwhelmed, but now I know how to better manage it, so it's not coming across and hurting or affecting other people. And then finally, with emotional intelligence, I have more social awareness, so I can pick up on what's going on with other people and how other people are, getting through their day, and address that as well. So like, that for me was the game changer. Most people who I've introduced this to have never heard of it before. And as soon as I start teaching them like how to do more self-awareness, how to do more social awareness, how to switch their communication styles, they're so much happier at work. Like, maybe they're not like, it's not going to automatically be like you got a raise just because you're working on this, but you feel better at work. You're not as stressed out. You're not as miserable. You feel more accomplished in what you're getting done. And like, that's really what I want. Like, I love making money, but I want to also feel good about the work I'm doing. I don't want to be miserable 40 plus hours a week, right? So
Yes, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of all these people that I'm going to send this podcast to, and I'm going to send that book to. So I love the book. I have never heard of the book, but I'm going to add that to my book list. Do you have any other books that you would recommend for anyone that is struggling with, self-care, self-love, social awareness, and just being happy within the workplace or with themselves or their podcast? Like, I'm sure that you had other resources that you were utilizing to get you to where you are mentally.
yes. So, if the focus is a mindset focus, one of the main podcasts I love is Jay Shetty's podcast called On Purpose. Yes. So he's a favorite of mine because he just gives a lot of good mindfulness techniques. And the reason I say mindfulness, because I know you're like, but we're talking about communication skills and we're talking about this. It starts with your mindset, right? Like, it starts with, you have to be willing to make this mindset shift, and it's going to be difficult. Like, I'm not going to pretend like it's going to be easy, because you're going to fall back on your bad habits. You're going to have days where you're like, I'm not even feeling this today, right? Like, I can't employ these techniques I've learned. Like, you have to know how to get through that in a mindfulness way, right? And like, really have that shift. And not to say that you have to have it right away to start, but again, it's a practice. The more that you practice it, the better and easier it's going to get for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And if you think of anything else after, let me know and I'll drop it into the show notes too, because we can share that. So, okay, if we want to connect with you, tell us your website, tell us your Instagram. We want to connect with you. Tell us how.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is growwithjovita.com. That's Jovita. And then anywhere on social is the same thing, at Grow with Jovita. So I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel. So I do have several book reviews like on my YouTube channel of different like books and stuff that I recommend. I do put that on YouTube. I have a Facebook group called Creating Career Confidence with Jovita. So there's not a lot of Jovitas out there. So if you look up Jovita, if you look up Grow with Jovita, you should be able to find me. And you're welcome to take any of the free resources. The template that I mentioned, the 6 steps, it's a free template right on my website.
Wonderful. And anybody can join that Facebook group?
Yes. Creating Career Confidence with Jovita.
I love that. Well, Jovita, thank you so much. You were absolutely amazing. I loved the value that you added here today. And I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. Anytime.
Thank you for tuning into the Stroke It podcast. I hope you were inspired. I hope you're willing and ready to take some action. I want to encourage you to consider 5 people that could benefit from today's podcast. Super simple to share this episode. You never know who could benefit from hearing this podcast and how you could inspire them to create the change in the life that they're wanting. Cheers, and thank you so much for tuning in. Also, consider giving a review.